The Nike Pegasus 41 and the Nike Pegasus 40. What's changed? What's different? And which one should you buy? A new Nike Pegasus is always exciting, and since this is an odd model year, 41, we get some pretty sizable changes. Now, you probably clicked on this video for one of two reasons. A, you ran in the Pegasus 40 or the Peg 39, which there weren't really that many differences, and you liked it and you're curious to learn what's different about this, the Peg 41. Or maybe you never really ran in the 40, or you didn't like the 40, but you liked the Vomero 17, and now you're seeing the Peg 41, and you see a little bit of Vomero 17 DNA in this shoe, and you want to understand how much there actually is. And as always with my Versus videos, let's start with the specs. Jumping into the Nike Pegasus 41, the specs for this shoe have been so frustrating to iron out that I just wish Nike would publish specs on their product page and not make this a big detective hunt to find out the actual specs for the shoe. But in the day since I recorded my initial impressions for the Pegasus 41, a link in the description if you're interested, the specs seem to have been ironed out. So what I'm going with now is that we have 37 mil of foam in the heel, 27 mil of foam in the forefoot, giving you a 10 mil drop. And Running Warehouse's specs have been updated to reflect this change. The weight, according to Running Warehouse as well, is 9.9 ounces or 283 grams. And again, this is all for the US men's size 9 reference size, which happens to be my size as well. I'll get to the weight in a moment. Moving to the Nike Pegasus 40, we had 33 mil of foam in the heel, 23 mil of foam in the forefoot with a 10 mil drop. And the weight was 9.4 ounces or 266 grams. Again, I'll get to the weight. That's also for the US men's size 9 reference size that everyone uses. Now, both these shoes are very similar in that they're both React midsoles. However, the Pegasus 41 is the new React X midsole and the Pegasus 40 is just React. The difference between those two foams is just manufacturing. They're both React foams. The foams are manufactured in the Pegasus 41 with injection molding, which gives you a more airy open cell foam. The Nike Pegasus 40 React is molded and manufactured by compression molding, which gives you a denser part. That's the difference, but both these shoes are actually still React foam. And they both still have two air zoom units in them, one in the forefoot, one in the heel, though I do think you feel the air zoom units in the Pegasus 41 more than you did in the Peg 40. I think they're actually a little bit firmer, and I'll get to that in a bit. And both of these shoes have a very traditional geometry and ride, and I would say the Pegasus 41 has an even more traditional ride over the Pegasus 40. I pointed this out in my initial impressions video, but where I think some of the disconnects with the specs for the Peg 40 have been coming from are in that the actual midsole height, the foam of the midsole of the Peg 41 is actually 24 mil. But if you include the outsole, the waffles, you do get 27 mil. And you can see there is a considerable difference between the Peg 41 and the Peg 40. The Peg 40 was about 20 mil of foam with, again, about a 3 mil outsole stack height as well. So it gives you that 23 mil measurement. But getting to the weights of these two shoes, this is where things get a little interesting. And based on the comments of my initial impressions video, it seems like the weights are a little bit all over the place. Now, for my shoes, the ones that I actually own and bought, as you can see here on this scale weighing the left shoe, I'm getting 277 grams in the left shoe for the Peg 41 and 279 grams in the right shoe. And for the Peg 40, I get 285 grams in the left shoe and 283 grams in the right shoe, making the Pegasus 41 the lighter shoe. But again, just a few grams. But neither one of these shoes match the specs that anyone is reporting. Nike actually reports a heavier spec than what Running Warehouse does, and I've seen other weights all over the internet. It's just, again, I just don't know why this has to be such a detective search to find the actual values for this. And it also seems that batch to batch or shoe to shoe is also differing considerably. Now, the other thing I'll say about my Pegasus 41 and my Pegasus 40 is they're both released versions of the shoe. The Peg 40 I bought in Japan on the day or the week of release, and the Peg 41 I bought here in Taiwan, again, on the day of release. So these are the release versions. Maybe future iterations of them through the production year, they make minor changes in the upper, in the insole something, and they make them a little lighter, a little heavier. I don't know, but these are the weights of my shoes. This is why I'm saying the Pegasus 41 is the lighter shoe, but the ones you buy may be different. Moving to the outsoles of these shoes, this is where we begin to see some significant differences. In the Pegasus 41, we have 11.2 in the widest point of the forefoot. We have 6.5 centimeters in the waist of the shoe and 8.7 centimeters in the heel. In the Pegasus 41, and this would go for the Pegasus 39 as well, you had 10.4 centimeters in the widest point of the forefoot, 6.4 centimeters in the waist of the shoe, and 8 centimeters in the heel of the shoe. Now, as you can see, the Pegasus 41 is significantly wider in the forefoot, and you definitely feel that. The Peg 41 rides much more stable. It feels much flatter underfoot, and you definitely notice that. Now, there's some midsole molding, which I'll get to, that also makes the Peg 41 ride differently, but if you ever found the Peg 39 or Peg 40 to be a little bit too narrow, the Peg 41 seems to make up for that for both forefoot strikers, midfoot strikers, and heel strikers, because we all foot strikes will benefit from the extra width across the board in the Peg 41. While the waist is still similar between the two shoes, I will say there's just a lot more structure around the waist of the Peg 41 than there is in the Peg 40, and it definitely feels like a much more stable, much more supported ride. And looking at the rubber coverage of the outsoles, both of these shoes still have full rubber coverage or mostly full rubber coverage, which again is a hallmark of the Pegasus and I think a requirement of a daily trainer for me. However, the Peg 41 really simplifies the rubber pattern. The rubber pattern on the Peg 40 and 39 I thought was very good, but it was just very complicated. There's just a lot going on there, and a lot of the parts, especially in the forefoot, for me as a forefoot striker, would wear very quick. Those two little pieces of rubber on the forefoot lateral side would wear extremely fast for me. But in the Peg 41, we just have really two pieces of rubber. Now, this is where some of the Vomero 17 DNA comes into the Peg 41. I think the Peg 41 rubber outsole is much more similar to the outsole that's on the Vomero 17, but it's even better. It's even simpler. You don't have that weird four-piece seam in the forefoot of the shoe. It's just a very simple, well thought out waffled outsole. Also, that hook in the heel really centers the heel, so that gives a channel through the center of the heel of the shoe, which makes the heel strike of the Peg 41 feel much softer. But the two pieces of rubber really center the shoe to allow you to engage the midfoot and off the toe in the shoe. So it just runs a lot smoother than the Peg 40 did. And I always loved the Peg 39 and 40 outsole, but the Peg 41 outsole is a significant upgrade here. Let's talk about the fit and the feel of these two shoes. Now, Nike has said that the last for both of these shoes is the same. They liked the fit of the Peg 40 and they used the same last to develop the Peg 41. However, and I said this in my initial impressions, I find this shoe wider and more accommodating than this shoe. Now, I walked around for about an hour this morning in both of these shoes, this one on my left, this one on my right, just to test how differently these shoes felt on foot. And while I do actually think they are the same last, I don't think Nike's lying about that, this shoe feels a little bit wider. And I think that comes down to the upper material here just being more accommodating. I praise this shoe for having such an accommodating upper, but I think this upper material, this Flyknit type engineered mesh upper, is just that much more accommodating. So again, if you found this shoe too narrow, this shoe's probably going to be pretty good. Now, both of these come in wide versions. I think that's going to be very wide, in this case, very accommodating. But if you really need a wide shoe, that's probably going to be a very good thing. Another thing that I think makes this shoe just feel like it's wider is again this midsole width. I talked about how much wider the contact patch of the outsole is on that shoe, but there's a lot of sculpting of the sidewalls of the midsole on this shoe, especially on the lateral side. You can see this outrigger right here. There's just a lot more material under the forefoot, which allows the foot to splay a bit more, and with a more accommodating upper, that's why I think this one just feels like it's a wider shoe, though I think technically it isn't actually any wider. Otherwise, the midfoot of this shoe and the ankle collar and the Achilles counter are the same in these shoes. Again, they said they liked the fit of this shoe and they used the midfoot and the heel from this shoe to develop this shoe. And I will say that the midfoot lockdown between these two shoes is nearly identical because it's the same system. As you can see, it's the same arch lock system, which is essentially a piece of fabric that starts here, wraps under the foot, comes over here, and really holds your foot down. Both these shoes have that. The other difference, though, is I think the ankle collar and the Achilles flare in this shoe, and you can kind of see that here, it's just higher. I always thought this was a little bit too low. Never caused any problems. It just felt a little bit too low. This one feels what I would call normal. This feels like any other Nikes. So I think they raised the ankle collar just a little bit, and you can see the Achilles flare on this shoe being much taller. It's kind of back to what the peg always used to be. So the fit overall, the lockdown overall of these two shoes is similar or the same, but again, I'm going to stick with the forefoot of this shoe just feeling wider because this shoe is just more accommodating in its fit. Moving to the midsole of these two shoes, starting with the Peg 41, the big change here is moving to React X foam in the Peg 41. Now, as I said in the upfront, the React X foam is still React foam. It's just manufactured differently. This is injection molding, which now allows Nike to control this foam and make it more airy, which is where that 13% more energy return is coming from in the product claims that Nike's making for this shoe. And I will say on foot, you definitely feel that this shoe is both more cushioned, but it's more lively underfoot. This shoe feels more responsive. It's not like ZoomX. This is not ZoomX foam, but it is a considerable upgrade from standard React foam. And I think it's a good addition to this shoe. And I will say it was one of the main things I was really worried about in this shoe, but it turns out it was the right move because it just makes this shoe more lively, and I think more people will enjoy the ride of this shoe. Another thing about this midsole is I think there's a lot of intelligent sculpting on the sidewalls of this shoe. As you can see on the lateral side, there's a big outrigger here in the forefoot that really controls the foot on foot strike. Again, I'm a forefoot striker who supinates, so I'm landing out there. That really pinches me in, gives me into this beautiful flat, wide forefoot, and it works really well. Another thing, and this is one of the problems I had ultimately with the Vomero 17 with that really soft ZoomX foam on top of a much firmer Cushionlon 2.0 foam, is they really redesigned this edge, the lower edge of the midsole in this shoe. One of the problems I had with the Vomero 17 was right here in the midfoot, especially here where it transitions into the forefoot, this really just kind of curved inward in the Vomero 17, and it also does that in the Peg 40. But in this shoe, they have an extra little lip here that it curves back out. So there's a lot more structure in the midfoot of this shoe. So if you ran into the problem that I had with the Vomero 17, where it just felt like I was rolling outward because this edge was collapsing inward, this seems to have fixed that. There's a lip here and it feels really nice. Again, this shoe feels really stable and really precise on foot strike. Looking back at the Peg 40, I think you can see there's considerably less of an outrigger of foam here in the forefoot, right where, again, I'm landing. Forefoot striker who supinates. And while I never had any stability issues with this shoe, this does curl in right here, and especially curls in right here. I could see where there could be that same problem the Vomero 17 has where you roll outward. I did see a few people in my comments say that they also had the same problem with the Peg 40, but now in the Peg 41, that should be completely solved because there's a nice lip over there that's redesigned and should really help structure the foot. And that really goes all the way around the Peg 41. They've really addressed some of the stability issues that came in the Peg 40. and they've really brought this back to probably the most stable peg in many generations. And again, just looking at the outsoles of these two shoes, you can see the differences now in the actual shoes. There's just more rubber in contact with the ground in the Peg 41 than there was in the Peg 40. I thought this was a great outsole. I actually think the flex grooves that are in the forefoot of the shoe worked really well to give the React foam, which is firmer, a little bit more flex. But now that React X foam is in the Peg 41 and it's much more flexible, much softer, much more cushioned, you don't need that. So you can get away with all of this nice rubber up here, which again just makes this a very smooth, stable Pegasus, which I think the peg is really needed for a few generations. So what's the verdict here? Which one is better? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. The Peg 41 is the better peg. Now, I spent a ton of time in this shoe, the Peg 40 and the Peg 39, which is a very similar shoe. I praise this shoe highly. I really enjoyed this peg. I had a lot of great running in this peg. But now that I've run in the Peg 41, it's time to retire this one and really just talk about this one. And this is where I'm going to get into the ride of this shoe. Now, I pointed this out in my initial impressions, but I think this shoe is a direct successor to the Peg 36. So if you're one of those runners who still thinks the Peg 36 is the last good peg, you may want to give this one a shot, because this feels like it's skipped the past 4 generations of peg and it's just been a straight update from the 36. This has a lot of the same DNA with a little bit of Vomero 17 DNA. So if you like that shoe, you're going to like this one even more. So what does that actually mean as far as ride? Well, in the ride of this shoe, the Peg 36 DNA is going to be a very flat feeling, stable ride. As you can see, there's not a lot of rocker in this shoe. This is very traditional geometry, very much like the Peg 36. So because of this wide forefoot, all of this rubber up here, this is just a very secure, stable feel that feels very flat and helps you really drive into the ground so you can toe off in the shoe. This shoe puts a lot of emphasis on you to do the work, which is something I love in a traditional daily trainer, and this is doing it better than most shoes out there. However, some of the Vomero 17 DNA and some of the things I liked about the Vomero 17 before I ran into my problem, and if you don't know what I'm talking about there, I'll put a link in the description to that video, is in the heel. The heel bevel in this shoe is very similar to the Vomero 17. So if you're a heel striker, you're going to have a very smooth heel strike in this shoe. And again, this channel through the center of the heel is going to make the heel strike feel much more cushioned in this shoe. These pieces of rubbers and the sidewall here is going to help center your foot, and it's going to roll you into this flat, wonderfully stable forefoot and help you toe off. The heel feel of this shoe is very reminiscent of the Vomero 17 to me, and I think that's a really good thing because that was a very structured heel. There was foam that wrapped up around the foot, structured and stabilized the heel. I think Nike did a really good job. So this shoe has some of that DNA in the heel, and I think heel strikers will really enjoy this shoe as well. Overall, if you're one of those runners who doesn't necessarily always want to run in max stack, max cushion, max rockered, sameness shoes, all of the norm that seems to be out there where every manufacturer is trying to turn every one of their shoes in a line to the same shoe, this is going to be that breath of fresh air. This is a very traditional daily trainer. And Nike has really brought the Peg 41 back to first principles and really made this the most Pegasus in many years. It's really remarkable. This is a masterful update, and I'm really happy to finally see Nike giving the Pegasus the attention it really deserves. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.